So I am so excited today, and thank you for joining me for this conversation between the two of us. And before I get into our conversation, um, and it is a conversation, it's not an interview. I've invited, and here I go, Jorja Rivero, who is a LCSW, which means she has a master's in social work from NYU. You are, and she is a clinical training. She clinically trained Gestalt psychotherapy and is a certified relational life therapist. And she's taught yoga for many years and continues to teach guided meditation. She works with couples, with individuals, with groups, and offers workshops. So thank you for joining me.
Oh my God, it's my pleasure. Are you kidding?
Yeah, it's so fun. So we met in New York City, and you work out of New York City, and of course I adore New York City for so many reasons, and um, and some of it is the innovation and complexity of human bodies and thinking and language and cultures that New York embodies. You know, it's just such a rich uh, mess of humans. You know, it's all what I call all things human. You know, like there's not a
Certainly is.
lot's going on. Yeah. So you've really probably worked with lots of different people, and I also want to bring in the cultural, the richness of different ways people also understand this dynamic. And the dynamic I want to talk about is what is defined as internalized misogyny. But I want to give it some context of why I, Liz Cook, am playing with this idea. So I was in a conversation with some people, and a young woman she's a teenager. A teenager said to me, my mother has internalized misogyny. And we weren't talking about internalized misogyny, we were talking about other things. But she just blurted it out. And I thought, isn't that an interesting thing for a young person to observe, a young woman to observe in her mother? And
Yes.
obviously, she's heard the term, she's exploring different things in school. So I didn't know the contextual thing, but her mother wasn't physically there at the moment. And it like seeded something in me. And I just kept thinking of her words vibrating because what I really wanted to ask was, what are you seeing? But she did uh, bring it out a little bit. She said, you know, I see her value men and men's voices and men's ideas more than women's. Now, her mother is an amazing woman. I'm not going to go into who she is, but you know, you would not think that knowing her that because she's values women very, very much. So, you know, the contextual, all the reasons why she might say that, but there's something there that I brought back to look into myself about. And in the past year, I've been teaching with Anasuya Isaacs a three 3 week course. We've worked with about 60 women now on the idea of being too much or not enough
Oh yeah.
as a patriarchal concept and construct in which we are now tethered to this whole perception of ourselves of being too much. Being too much to what is never described, but being too much is the idea. Or not being enough, never feeling good enough, never feeling. And my work is with core awareness. My work is with core integrity, the psoas that really is about showing up and being who you are and being more than human, because psoas is very primal. It's about animal body. It's about, you know, like a tree coming into its full canopy. It's like, you know, what am I? Who am I? Not just within the story of my family, the familiar, or the culture, or the colonized perception, but something more than that. So working with someone who does a lot of work with leadership with women in leadership, Anasuya would bring in this kind of capacity for us to explore, what are we talking about? What is being too much? Why am I not, not enough? What are we talking about? Like internally, where do we hear these stories? Where do they come from? How do they live inside my flesh and blood and bone? And how does it make me feel to carry that around? And what came out of working this past year with these women is that it was a woman who started the conversation with them to believing they were too much. It was not a man who told them that. It was a woman who brought them into a certain way of being in themselves that had an expectation of them. It wasn't that they didn't have different feelings about their father or males in their life, but it was almost consistently when someone was really, really looking, I would almost say shamed, within themselves. It came from a woman's telling them that.
Interesting.
Yes. And that was my piece with the young girl going, there is a rupture here. There is what I would think of as like a crack, but even more, I think of it as like a, a tear in our capacity to be in touch with the feminine power of ourselves. So we did work with nourishing the female soul, but the issues continue even no matter what we named the class, which we were always working with the same idea, but naming it in different ways. There was this way that I'm somehow too much. Oh, I don't want to take up space. I'm so sorry if I've said too much, or or I'm not enough, or how we feel about other women. You are too much. This is too much. Like, could you tone it down? And both of us in our adults have heard from friends and other people, you are too much. I'm too intense. She's too much. It's like, and we hear it from women. But that's why this kind of piece that this young girl brought to me and just seeded it right there in that moment, speaking about her mother. And she adores her mother, but she's seeing something, and it's like, what are we looking at? And I found it very difficult to actually discuss this with most women, including her mother, because the feeling I felt was I was blaming them, or I was giving them.
You were being too much or too little.
Too much by even bringing up the fucking subject. It was just too much. Like, back off. I've got enough on my plate. I don't need that.
Oh, the conundrum.
Yeah. So when you saw me in New York in December, and I don't know how the conversation got there. I was probably still pondering it, but I brought up something about that, and you immediately responded and knew exactly what I was talking about.
Yes.
I said, let's have a conversation, because women don't want to talk about it. And I don't think it's about that I have hate or contempt, but there is this subtle way of minimizing ourselves and then each other. And the last piece I'm going to say is, one of the places I see it play out is who we value working with, who we value learning from. So in my world, in education, I notice that people, when they want to go study something, will turn towards a male, often a white male, to study with, when in fact there might be amazing women all around that would actually take them into new ways of thinking about something that is what I would call, the best way I can define it is what I can understand as more of an indigenous perspective on a matriarchal culture. In other words, we have patriarchy that is the essence of what's coming up. But what else is there? So in that tear, I'm looking kind of through this, like, where do we go to find something else? So that I'm not even discussing this, I'm somewhere else. I'm in the core of my being, and I happen to be very in touch with that energy of life, of bringing life into the world, that it only comes through the feminine. Um, and that we bring human beings here, and yet we don't value ourselves as one of the most powerful forces on earth. And we surrender that. And I understand the construct of why, we all manipulate different ways of kind of trying to be in this very tight box. But at this point in time and space, when we can see that it's not really working for anybody, why do we still, why are we still working with it? Why are we still feeling that? So I'm going to throw that out to you about anything you want to say about that. We'll just see where our conversation.
Oh my God, I'm so grateful that you have this in your mind, in your heart, in your body. I'm so grateful for all the work you do, Liz. And this is like, if there's one topic I've been sitting with and working with and having conversations around, it's this for a pretty long time. And there's so much to say and so much, I mean, even right now, I feel we could take the conversation in so many different directions that are so exciting. And the first thing that I have an inclination to move towards, although I'm not attached to it, is that yes, the systems that live outside, yes, this is a very big problem for all of us, though, men and women.
Yes.
Because the system is not just outside. It's almost like not only do we come from generations that have, you know, as they say, the legacy of dissatisfaction just keeps getting, passed on. Like, here's the baton, you carry it now. And the amount of work that we have to do to understand that it goes through phases. I mean, it takes so many years to understand that the system is out there, but then how does it live inside of it? You see, what is the voice? Yes, you might get the reflection, and you might have gotten the reflection of being too much or too little. I got it from a male, my dad. But some people might get it through it doesn't matter. The thing is, the reflection will come. And when it comes and we're really young, it gets in. And if there's not something that gets in that brings support and containment, and like I'm sure you've heard this, it's not the survival of the fittest, it's the survival of the nurtured. And I love that.
Yes.
Right? That makes me, yes, absolutely. So if that space within, when we're really young, that we're not born with it formed, this is the meaning I've given it throughout my years of inquiry and work, and we're not born with it, we're born with the potential. Yes. For us to create an awareness and a voice and an orientation and a feeling state towards our goodness. Mm-hmm. And that basic goodness, if it doesn't get a reflection, a nurture, a communication, a gaze, a touch that keeps reinforcing that, what gets in is this too much, too little, or above, below, or better than, or worse than, and then we're off to the races, imitating that split called patriarchy, that is really someone is above, someone is below. That's my understanding of it. right? And within that, then everywhere, I mean, in the culture, the reflection that is given back is you are too much or too little, constantly.
Yeah.
So the work I like doing with people is the moment we are in conversation in the room, right? The world, of course, is going to come in as this happened, that happened, but how does that live in you?
Yes. Well, that's what I work with. So what I literally have been playing with since 2019 is colonization in the physical body. And I didn't call it that for many years, but I would call it, for example, the mechanistic model of body as an object. So, we have a spine and therefore we have a column, and if you think you have a column, then psoas in particular is going to support that. It's going to actually be a structure for supporting a weakness that I feel within me. But if I understand that I'm a living system and you even say that on your website, I'm a living organism, I'm dynamic, I'm expressive, Mother Nature does not see any of us, nothing is too much, right? In terms of
Exactly.
balance. But, we don't say, a redwood is too big. We don't say a waterfall is too much, we don't, and that's what I am. Then I realize that keeping myself small, or I'm keeping myself under control through that hierarchy that you're speaking of, to the caste system, to the top-down model. And so once I started Resmo Manicom's work with my grandmother's hands and trauma as a racialized concept, I started to understand that the white body became this kind of achievement through the colonization. So using the spine as the example of that, of literally, the white man's spine has become the ideal of fitness, of dance, of even of yoga. Even though the traditions of it come somewhere else, like how it's now used in the system, everything keeps fitting into this top-down model. And so I had to go to indigenous writers and indigenous thinking to start deconstructing that in myself, because that's generations, right? Of stature is about getting a spine that's rigid rather than a spine that moves. You look at the spine of, North America, and you look at the spine of South America, or you look at the European spine versus the African spine, you see different spines. Those are humans, and yet they're moving and expressing differently. So as women, I realized this is another layer of just what you're speaking of, is the top-down patriarchal control over the body, control over. So therefore, your emotions become too much because the idealized expression is this or that. It's the rational mind over the expression of body and the control over. So I understand that then that's literally in my tissue.
Yes.
When we move our tissue, when we actually, which is why working with Anasuya is unique to her, is she's never worked with someone who takes us into making sounds through the O's down through our course and get that spine to move in some other way besides, no, this is the way I should be. This is what it is.
I love that you're bringing that up, because a while back, and I was looking this up yesterday, and I couldn't find it. So my hypothesis, it's like a make pretend hypothesis. But a while back, when I went looking for the etymology of the word misogyny, I came across this other word, misogynic. Yesterday I was trying to find out, like, where did I see this? I know I didn't come up with it. And I remember seeing the definition and going, it said hatred of change. And I'm like, oh my God, that's it. It's this hatred for, you see, the too much and too little, the up and down. The other way it can be held as an interesting way of just contemplating is we hate movement.
Yes, we hate the wild.
Well, exactly. Like if you're not,
You cannot define in organization in our own sense of, how does things move? When something moves, that's actually the potential for innovation. And I work a lot with homeostasis, is the fact that like most people who are traumatized or perceive themselves as traumatized, or the conversation in the Western world around trying to be healthy or well, something is about how do I stabilize myself so I have a homeostasis that I can rely on. But life actually isn't that. It's the ability how to have enough actually nurturance and nourishment in the system that it can innovate, that it can actually respond to like
exactly,
it doesn't actually know anything about, which would be
exactly. And we come to this beautiful idea of process, right? Which is another way of saying innovation,
exactly.
because the body and the mind and a forest is and everything is a constant process. It
Yes,
moves back, it moves forward, it moves up and down, and it doesn't go on being too much or too little, or, I have to just be this. And the moment we do that, we know for sure in the body, but we know also in the mind. There's very few things in life that you have to have that, either or, uh, I don't know, approach with. And therefore, if not, there's no relationship. And if there's no relationship, then you're deadening yourself and your mind and your heart and these too much, too little, not good enough, above it all, are gonna come up because we've inherited that.
we have.
We've inherited that way of seeing that is not really seeing.
Right.
And it takes so much work to even know. I mean, for me, this was so powerful. And this is one of the things I love about the work I've done in my own life with this little being, but the work I do with people, that once you turn in and you start realizing that these things, first and foremost, these ways of thinking, these attitudes, these ways of arranging, these ways of perceiving, these ways of feeling, live inside of you. Yes, things might have happened definitely when you were young that you couldn't do anything about. So that too much comes in, or worse, and you can't do anything about that. But when you get older, you can.
Yeah.
And that is just freedom. Now, when we start waking up to the conversation and go, well, it starts really, it's in you. Yes, it's there, but it's in you. And if we don't look at how it's in us, then we can't see how we support it.
Exactly, how we collude with it. And then that's the piece that I felt like that a young mind, a young forming woman who's kind of stepping back from, she's had the freedom to step back, right? She's had the freedom to think whatever she wants. And now she's actually kind of approaching that of like, oh, look, my mother's doing this, and yet she has space between that. So to me, that's a gift that her mother gave her, right? As well, that she can go, oh, wow, look what you do. Like, why do you do that? Like, there was a curiosity that struck me deeply because it didn't feel like she wasn't criticizing her. She was like pointing out an observation that, the minute she said it, the couple people who were sitting at the table were like, you
Whoa.
whoa, whoa, because it appears to be a criticism, but it's actually, to me, this incredible freedom that she could actually observe it in motion in someone else.
Yeah, I love it. And again, going back to that idea at the beginning that both men and women, anything that is uh, having a human experience, I dare to say, has it. And that is a profound thing to reflect on or consider, even consider. And we can go to that piece that was so tempting that you named of, you know, putting other people above, or the great sad fact that in, you know, psychotherapy and this, all the big voices are mostly men. So it's a way of thinking, okay, that, yes, and that is part of the world we live in. But the thing that is, to me, I just keep returning to how we cannot tolerate movement. There's a certain movement that wants to happen.
Oh, yeah.
That's the, right? The variability. Even when people say, why am I sad now? I was happy earlier. Well, is it a problem? You know, variability. This natural movement that we're lucky we don't despise it as much when it's in terms of our inhale and our exhale. But
some of us do.
this thing that we want to,
can you please teach me the right way to breathe?
well, but there it is.
I'll know what I'm supposed to do, and I won't breathe too much or too little.
But there it is, right? There it is. Like once you start, I love these conversations that once you start seeing with a certain lens or hearing or picking up on something of how much work we have to do to get in touch with our basic goodness, and the fact that I'm not better or worse than anyone, you're not better or worse than anyone, and here we are having this experience that moves us outside, inside. How do we live?
Well, one of the things, so I was thinking this morning about, you know, I have a background of fiber arts and weaving, and so I often think about the like when you have a tear, you know, like I feel like the horrors of patriarchy and colonization, the torture, you know, the literal scolding of women wearing things so they wouldn't speak, you know, or they spoke too much or they spoke out of turn, you know, and just all the different ways, you know, whether you go to the witch burnings or whatever we want to track, we're looking at the feminine energy of movement of earth, of Mother Earth, of this dynamic of life, of the wild, of that which we cannot control, but we sure try really hard to stranglehold her, and think that, you know, she's not going to appear in all her force and power. We can't strangle her to take the too much out of her. She is life itself. So then I'm looking at you know, in simple weaving, you have the warp and the weft. So the warping is the what you're talking about, what holds the sense of being, for life and for children and for community and for connection and between women. And so when I'm looking at, you know, that's partly why we came together, was to start to, I was so tired of hearing women show up and say, kept apologizing for themselves or can't locate their core. And I'm thinking, God, if we can't pull this together, it's women who need to bring themselves forward so there is a balance. Okay, we all know patriarchy doesn't serve us. So how are we going to let this construct that is falling apart, that is dissolving, allow something else to come forward? Keep playing into it. That's part of what I'm playing with in myself, is like, you know, the audacity to show up and be you.
Yes.
You know, just that.
And you know, and it's amazing. Yes, and I see it across the board in both men and women. Like men being terrified of showing their own variability, not always knowing the answer. admitting that it hurts to disconnect from empathy, admitting that it's terrifying to not know that they're good enough,
Yes.
and the same is true then inside uh, of females.
Yes.
And here we are in this conundrum, and as you were expressing the idea of nature and this bigger conversation that moves, and the weaving, you see the reconciling. Our mind has been so overly developed. It's like we're parading around with these overly developed calves.
Lobes, overdeveloped lobes.
That are just like mortifying, right? And for our mind to learn to yield
Yes.
the goodness of our heart, it's not something that when you take on the process that the ego, that's just using one word here, but that part will go willingly, to go find your goodness. There's a lot of internal turmoil and rebellion that starts happening. I'm sure you see that also in the physical body with movement, but I see it a lot with thought. The moment you make you mentioned earlier, like a crack, and I was going to say, yeah, but not like the good kind, right? Like Leonard Cohen used to sing, like the one that allows light to get in or out.
To fall into something, because there is cracks now. There are cracks, right? There's cracks in the patriarchy. There's cracks in
Yes,
colonization. We're talking about it now. So there's all
yes,
cracks. White bodies are dealing with the fact that we're white bodies. And it's like, wait a minute, aren't I the ideal? Like, why isn't everybody else the other, the other, and it's like, so there are all these cracks, there are all these threads, and they're all over the place, right? And so as a weaver, I see this idea of the wharf. And one of the things you talked about was, a group of women that you often discuss these ideas with, so that there's actually a dialogue, because isn't that part of how we can't do it alone? We can't,
that's it.
the whole idea of being top down is I can be at the top and I don't need anyone else.
That's it. And we learn through others, and then we learn to do that with ourselves. And that's part of the great healing,
That's
because this other terrain that you're talking about, that innovates, that is the feminine, that is the earth, that is whatever we want to call it.
I mean, we're mammals, for God's sake, and that's taboo.
You really enter through conversation.
Yeah.
You enter through relationality.
Yeah.
And we don't know yet how to do power with and not power over or under.
Yes.
But the power with, like the fact you and I right now are having this conversation as like power with.
Yeah.
And something other starts moving. Like in our conversation with you right now, I'm not afraid. Where are we going to go? I don't know. But let's go.
Let's find out. There's curiosity, there's discovery, there's play.
You see, this is one of the things that in that hatred of change,
Yeah.
right? Hatred of movement.
Yes. I love
then there's not a relationality. There's a script. You need to know the answers. You always need to be finding a solution. You're blah, 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 blah. I mean, it's not only exhausting, but terrifying.
Yes.
I think at that point, our goodness kind of goes, I don't know. I don't know that I'll come out, of course, and we never run away from it, and we're operating from that innately.
There's a exploration with the psoas in which I don't know if we've played with this, but when there's movement in the core, so and it happens, when we're on ground, we're just standing, we can find this shift of weight that changes the way the brain focuses here into the back brain and into the primal brain, and it basically allows us to feel our bones and feel the earth. And the minute someone goes there, their psoas lets go. When you're in your bones, your psoas is not hyper vigilant because we know where we are. We know where we stand. We can feel ourselves standing there. And there's something in the bones that, bring us a sense of connection because it vibrates on the frequency of the earth. So we're not going at high speed, we're going at a slower rhythm. And invariably when people go there, they go, I feel really vulnerable. And it's
Yes,
almost like, that shouldn't be happening.
yes,
And I go, yes, it should, because we are.
exactly. Like, yes, welcome to reality.
Then you don't respond with any kind of empathy, but you don't respond literally. You're in a kind of freeze in not being able to actually move with the moment, move with what's being said, or what is happening in the space. And so then there is the fear response. But the fear response is just what you're saying. It's the lack of movement.
Yeah. And movement, right? Even as relationality, movement as dialogue, movement as I do and I receive and I respond.
Yeah.
A participation, a collaboration.
Yes.
Without that, I think we dry up and this
We do. We literally dry up. We literally dry up in the core of our body.
and this speediness won't then allow the descent where we become aware of the very thing we have to become aware to heal. And not only to heal, the meaning I've given it is this is necessary for my own growth, evolution, whatever you want to call it, that everything is connected. And I am as vulnerable as you, as anybody. Here we are from this point of inception. Then what am I going to do about it? Because that speedy mind or that up and down way of thinking can't come in there.
Yeah. No, it's what I've been recently thinking of as kind of a horizontal axis. So, you have this connection with the earth through the axis. You have the connection of earth through your bones. We stand up, as Jaap van der Wal, the embryologist, says, human embryos rise up against falling apart.
Oh, I love that.
and but that's a constant involution. You fall apart and you rise up.
Oh my God, that's
So
so beautiful.
that is the rhythm of being a human organism.
And that is when we are not embracing that, trusting in that, being in the process. That's it.
We're
And
literally bracing to resist what gravity does with us. What she does, what the
this is amazing because the thought that just came is, wow, could it then be that then that fear of bracing ourselves with what gravity wants to do with us, right, is then this, that the way we brace against that, not only the inherited trauma possibly, and the things that did happen that we cannot change, but we can change how we think about them and how they live in our body through a lot of work. But could it be that that terror then, it's almost like it braces into more containment in the body, this thou shalt not be too much or too little.
Yes. And I think that's one of the things I feel intuitively is that the distortion of what women have done to small young girls in that is to carry on that lineage of right. So then you're receiving a fear transmission that somehow by expressing yourself you're going to be harmed.
Yes.
Yeah. And so yeah, we can almost understand it as both their own process showing up as just they're terrified. So like when people say, I just want to feel safe. And I go, but safety isn't outside of yourself.
Yep.
Literally not. I mean, I know this for a
Or static.
yeah, I know that when I was younger, I was more afraid than and the reason I was afraid, and I could sense in the room, I could be by myself and I'd be afraid, right? So
Yeah.
I wasn't in context to something that was scaring me, like, the ceiling's falling, or, somebody's jumping through a window, or, like something's happening to be responding to. I just was afraid.
Yes. I was afraid of fear.
I'm just like my nervous system. So people want to
Yeah.
that nervous system, and they can, but it doesn't happen by making sure everything outside is okay. Like I can't, like all the trigger warnings now, like that kind of feeling, like if I can manipulate everything outside of me, then I will feel safe. And it's the same with intimacy. If I can, be sure that you are somebody I think I can be intimate with, then maybe I can. But actually, the more I kept working with myself, I started to realize that I could be in really scary situations, not that I want to be, but I actually felt okay because my
Yeah.
body, my animal body could read the situation.
Yes.
So if I wasn't safe, I left. Like if my body said, get the fuck out, I got out, but if it said, like like, yes, this is change, this is movement that you're not familiar with, this is, whatever this is, but so what, I'm like, so what? I'm okay.
I love that you're bringing up, you see the control thing. So the more we try to control anything, whether it's ourselves or another or something, the less in relationship we're going to be with it. So the more control, the less relationship. And then we're back in that conundrum. If there's not relationship, like a variability, a movement, things are not innovating and hydrating, it's not good.
It's not good. There's no juiciness there, and there's no resiliency, because it
Exactly.
fluidity does give you resiliency. So like, it's not that I choose to go into situations that I think are theoretically dangerous or whatever, but I also don't avoid moving through my life and exploring with people and knowing that maybe I'll step on your toe and you'll say, ouch, I didn't like that, and then I can say, oh, wow, oh, I can be responsive so that we can actually keep growing those interconnections of that what I was just playing with is the idea of a because we have this very clear, the psoas has a very clear axis with the earth. Like that's really all psoas wants you to know is, do you know where the ground is? Can you actually feel the ground? Because it's the earth that literally allows you to rise up. So if you're floating somewhere or you can't locate, you're going to be afraid. But now I'm realizing with these that I've been playing with for this past year and have taught me so much and have been really able in I think the field that Anasuya in particular holds, she's capable of holding a field in which people can kind of dissolve into it. And then I take them into that dissolve in movement, and it's kind of fun to work with other people who can, I might not go there in my own system, but she's just says, come on, ladies, show up, like, let's do this. And it invites that. And so there is that goodness she sees. And that's kind of like, come on, you can do this. And I do think it's part of her lineage to, as a Black woman, for women to gather and say, we must stay together. We must each other. And so that's where I see the cultural. White women do not do that. I actually followed Resmaa.
White men don't either.
No. And one of the things Resmaa says in his book on racial trauma is that white bodies have to learn to hang around together. Like they actually have to know what it feels like
or to collaborate.
And so, he says, get a couple other white bodies together and just hang around and see what you do. And I've done that for 18 months. And the small group we have that we meet with, we can feel the instinct to run constantly. Like, okay, like the conversation's over, like, bye. Like we're constantly like, like, oh my God. And it's like, okay, I'll stay here for a little while longer and see if I can handle this. And I don't see that and I think it has to do with survival, right? Like white bodies have learned that if we can just get to the top, we'll survive no matter what,
Oh my, I love that you're bringing this up. It makes me think of, so a couple of things came up. Now I have like 6 thoughts going on in my feminine way of thinking. We'll get somewhere. But
go anywhere.
I love that you're bringing up the hanging around together and the collaboration and the access to the earth. Like Psoas wants us to know, like, hey, are you aware that the earth is holding you, something bigger, right, that is there supporting,
Yes.
not just coming after you.
No.
Because if we're not aware of that, we will also project it out as we're being, persecuted, which we were, and which our ancestors were, and that definitely lives in our bones and our tissues, and it definitely happens in this current world everywhere. It continues to happen, but there's something there when we move into an awareness of there's something bigger I can collaborate with, or the territory inside, the unknown, the forest within, the wild within, that is also bigger. It's going to move you in a direction other than just up or down, too much, too little. I always think of those thoughts from my ego as being so limited, like the dance steps are so boring.
Yeah.
It's like forward, back, up and down, either or. Now you're good, now you suck. Like, we come up with a better tune. And so that came up. And the other thought now currently evaporated, but I'm sure it will come back.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And so I want you to talk to me about how you've been working with this idea. I've been working with it in the soma, in seeing that literally people can't stand on their own 2 feet. And I don't mean that, like I have had women say, like, for example, when I've said that, they said, boy, that actually is a negative term for me. But I love that they said it. They said, to rise up and be able to stand on your own 2 feet. I heard that as a way of like, get it together because I'm not going to be there for you. Right. So that was interesting because that wove a whole nother piece into mine. It's like, oh, wow. To me, being able to fully feel your bones on the ground is a way of occupying your own space, right? Occupying your own being, really actually showing up for yourself. And that's where what's called the audacity of the gallbladder, the ability to actually flourish, to actually show up maybe bigger than you think you are. It's like the redwood tree that's been growing in a pot. It has no idea that it's a 90-foot tree.
Yeah.
Potential. So we don't see.
We're all like that, right?
Right, we're all like that. We don't see our own potential. And that's what I see in women is if women, there's a beautiful book called If Women Rose Rooted, Blackie wrote it, Sharon Blackie. And, that was that whole idea of mythology of like, if we could root into the earth, we could rise up and we could shift so much of the suffering and the isolation that is worldwide. It would shift everything. And yet I see women keep collapsing. They can't rise up. And unless it's that, masculine way of militaristically trying to show structure.
Well, and I think that that's where our goodness or our
that sensibility.
Yeah, it will protest in the back.
Say more about that. It will
protest. It won't come out. Like, we have an intelligence. If we look at a baby, right? There's no evil baby.
No.
Okay. And if we look at babies, all they want to do is, can I give you a kiss? Can I help you? Of course, and then the world starts coming in. But our nature
Oh yeah,
is that.
it's relational.
Relational. We know we're connected. We know how to reach from our heart, how to stretch. And when we are living from there, the same thing that you were just mentioning, that, when the militaristic comes in, if we really learn to say yes to that part in us that is inherently good and knows, it functions under a different law.
Yes. Oh, beautifully said.
And if we learn, like we give ourselves to that devotionally, we learn to receive it and surrender to it. Now, these are words that in patriarchy thinking are terrifying.
Hmm.
I mean,
Yeah.
terrifying.
Think of all
And
kinds.
but you see the amount of grief we have to work out of the body, the amount of shame, the amount of grandiosity also, which is, to me, it's another form of shame. It just looks very different. And it sounds different, but the amount that we have to get out to be able to root, because in that soma, when we're connected to that soma, where you see the soul that I believe, and I don't know, of course, I play with the edges of knowing, lives in the body.
Yeah.
And when we're in contact with what would feel good to me, to this being right now, and I know how to trust that or support that trust, then there's no room for the other dialogue. And when the other dialogue gets triggered or activated, or I start going, what the hell just happened? That now it's flared up again, I can keep turning towards, hold on.
Yeah.
There comes that not so good way of thinking up again.
Yeah.
Because in that way of thinking called patriarchy, no one wins.
No, nobody does. No.
It's either up or down, and those that are up are also, they win and they don't win, and that's just the complicated thing. I mean, to me, being far away from my goodness and operating from that would be losing. I don't care if it looks like I'm above. It would feel terrifying. So
A question that I'm always curious to ask, and you brought it up, and I would love to hear the way you would kind of somatize it. How would you bring it into the body? One of the things with psychology and this somatic world is this break in what we call the ego.
mhm.
I know it's a construct, and it's a Western construct, and it's a colonized concept because psychology is a colonized concept as we understand psychology. Not the mythology, not the dreams, not the, but how it's been packaged, right? And and so where is the ego?
Oh my God. Okay, so the meaning I've given this
Okay.
in my journey, it's the conditioned mind.
Thank you. Thank you. I love that. That's
The conditioned mind. And so it's going to be very, very limited. It has a lot of mandates.
right. Because
It is rooted in impossibility and that legacy of dissatisfaction. Like, let's just, it's not going to be possible for you.
woo! Woo! Say that again. That is woo! That's
Rooted in impossibility.
rooted in impossibility. My whole body is shimmering right now. It's just like, ooh, ooh.
Mhm. Yeah. And so imagine then what happens to this other conversation that wants something different from us.
Yes, definitely. I'm being
And it requires trust. This is why I think I said earlier, if not, that will protest. Because this other conversation is possibility, renewal.
say protest. What does protesting mean to you? Like what?
Okay, To me, it can look like many different things, like somatizing things, like the body seizing up, like a refusal. We're trying to break free from this way of thinking, and something just sadistically will keep saying, you're not getting free.
Yes. Yes.
Woo!
Yes. Well,
I mean,
that's
those
all that
terrifying.
invisible, that kind of invisible prison we're in, and that we don't even know we're in.
Well, I love that, because that's where you see, no matter what happens outside, how does it live inside?
Right.
It is that voice. And that is, to me, that's one of the ego voices that is so conditioned
Yes.
that I don't know, but there's not like a rehabilitate your ego class.
I know there should be.
Well, I actually think the strategy has to be different, because I think it's been so deformed and so sick. It's so sick. It really is in all of us. And it's not a problem. It's a problem if we don't recognize it and if we're afraid to have the conversation. But when we recognize that it is like sick, we can start doing something other, which is I have to then shift my attention towards my nature.
Yes.
And my nature operates in a different law. It's rooted in this other rich tapestry of possibility. Everything is connected, and it's not about right or wrong. It's like beyond right and wrong. And I'm not talking here about magical, because eventually we need that other part of our mind that can sift and discern and cut through and say yes and no and all these things. But until we don't reclaim this other breathing entity that feels and thinks differently via our body and our sensations, and what might give me, in my experience of like this specific unique body I'm having right now, what gives it pleasure, delight, ease, peace, have it feel inspired, oriented towards its nature, which is possibility. If I'm not allowing for that, I will be driven by yes, no, good, bad, up, down, too much, too little. You were amazing yesterday, and right now you suck, and you're going to suck for 3 days in a row. It's terrifying to live like that.
Yeah. Wow.
So entering into this other place where we come from possibility. That's the thing you mentioned at the beginning of our call so beautifully. Like, the female body is nothing but variability, possibility, and the human body is renewal.
Yes.
It's in constant renewal.
Constantly. Yes. It's constantly restoring itself.
And it's like, I feel like doing this.
I know. Look. We're in the wave motion, the involution
Right?
and the unvolution, the gel, the soul of the soul.
Yeah.
That's why I use an embryological paradigm, because we are so mechanistic in our thinking, and we're so mechanistic then in our being, how to be. We try to take a mechanistic approach to that. I have to work on my ego. I have to do this. I have to do this. It's like, I don't even know where the fuck the ego is. So I'm just, going into what I call animal body, meaning I am dissolving out of all of that to not know how to breathe properly, but to be breathed. And
Yes.
and the moment I'm breathed, the ease of my organism is like, oh, it it's the beauty, what all that comfort you're talking about, and the tracking of pleasure as actually an intelligence.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And that's part of that, shame of like, oh, what are we talking about? Are we talking about sex? Are we talking about, it's like we're talking about life. We're talking about the
Yeah.
touch of
Embodiment, right? Like the delight of being in a flesh, bone, I mean, the
Yeah.
miracle, the
Yes.
miracle. Yes.
So yeah, this has been so beautiful. Wow. Who knew we were going to go all the way there?
I've
In-
had so much fun. Yes. So much fun. Mhm.
yeah, this
And there's so much, like right now, I just feel, that heart, soul, mind stimulation where I just want to keep going. And uh, it almost feels like the conversation is just beginning.
I think it is.
Yeah.
I feel like you sparked something that I'm gonna listen to and digest and keep letting it kind of pour through me because some of the ways that you shifted the conversation to that basic idea of we're terrified of movement. How interesting as a living organism to be afraid of movement.
Oof.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
just sitting with that, moving with that, breathing with that, rolling around on the floor. People, I always have to describe why I get on the floor and roll around because most people are like, why are you doing that? And I always make the joke of, if you hand a ball, an inflatable ball to a child and just hand it to them, they'll find all kinds of things, all possibilities. If you hand it to an adult, they'll go, what do you want me to do with this?
Exactly.
And it's like,
Oh,
gosh, the play of life. Yeah, the enjoyment of being, just being.
well, and the disconnect from that renders us militaristic.
Ooh, I agree. I agree
So
that
the solution is not even fighting the militaristic. We're going to get nowhere. It's returning.
yes, I'm so
But
with,
to right, but to return, oh boy, like we have to admit not knowing. I know what I wanted to bring up a while back, and I know we're going to wrap up, but this idea that no one is born knowing, and we learn as we do. And in that learning as we do, there's an openness, that a play that we have to allow something other to guide us versus the conditioned mind that again is very limited. Like, now you suck, now you're great, now you're above it, now you fixed it, you got it, now you know.
there's a measure going on.
Now you can rest,
And
okay.
I would like to say that knowing from my world is there is a knowing. There's a deep ancestral knowing, but there's also a deep ecological knowing. That there is I find it in the bones. I find that when I can really live in my bones there is a deep knowing I'm accessing that is not anything I know, but it's a knowing. And that's what
Yeah.
I was referring to, even to the fear of something, is that without that knowing, when I'm knowing, I'm reading something that is beyond what I can see or hear or smell or taste or touch. It actually takes me into kind of I don't know, it's like million billion year old knowing, it's like something that is a is a is beyond my time and space, but only if I'm in my time and space. If I'm in my bones, I'm like here now, I'm sitting here at my desk, and I can sense the floor and I can sense the earth underneath the floor. But in that becomes this knowing that I can begin to really be guided by and moved by, that is
I love that.
taking me somewhere that I do not know. And it's
And if I were to ask you this, whenever you were in that place, that I had the absolute gift of touching twice with you, you've taken me. I know the space. You've seen me have this reaction of like, oh boy, whoa.
you also know how to hang out in your heart and just stay there in the unknowing, right? To not feel like you have to do anything with the unknowing.
Yeah, it's like a receiving, but if you're there, right? Or when you're there, the very last thing you want to do is go control something, dominate it, power over it, the last thing.
Again,
So
not even a thought form.
that's it. So I have this, it's like, if we turn there, then this other charade that we're trying to fight in a way, where actually the more we fight it, the more it's like, we're not gonna grow out of the conundrum by playing its game.
Yes. Yes, that's
by
what,
being antagonistic.
yes.
But if we say yes,
A hierarchy.
if we say yes to this other place, there's so much that will just simply not apply.
Yeah.
That's our goodness, right? That's our deeper nature, that is not like goodness meaning like whatever.
No, I love that you're shaping it that way, because it's an innate goodness. It's an innate quality of life itself, of being alive, of being present in this moment of as a human. Yeah.
Yes.
Ooh.
Oh. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
But I know we should keep this to a practical little place that people can listen in on our conversation.
Yes,
Let's try it.
yes.
But let's do it again sometime.
Oh my God, I'd love to.
Let's take this and see where it goes, and then come around.
I would love to. I had so much fun and feel so nourished and delighted. I love that that was the password. Love it.
Mm,
Thank you so much, Liz.
yeah.
Thank you.
Bye.
Okay. Bye.